what exactly is Buddhism, the fundamentals of Buddhism from you.
If I look at Buddhism or the Buddha's teachings from a mixture of these two perspectives, easiest description of Buddhism is a science of the mind, art of mind training. In the West, psychology, which deals with the mind and our consciousness, is a fairly new subject. It's a new field. It started mainly in the 20th century. Whereas in the Buddhist system, the study of the mind has been around for 2,500 years. So it's a very rigorous psychology, you could say. If it's a very distracted mind, how to focus it, how to gain concentration through different meditation techniques, through different rituals. If it is a very aggressive mind, how do you make it calm and composed? If it's a very egoistic, selfish mind, how do you make it more compassionate, more altruistic, more caring? If it's a very dull mind, how do you sharpen it? How do you make it more intelligent? So the Buddhist theories, practices, philosophies, rituals, a lot of things that Buddhists do and the Buddha taught should help us transform the inner state of the mind. In this century, we have been doing so well materially, but in the same process as we were becoming successful economically and successful in material development, our internal state of the mind, the inner mental stability has been declining. People are far more restless now. There are more mental health issues in this century than there was in the 20th century. So given these challenges, and given that we have the basic material conditions, thus it's important now, it's timely now to look inward. Some person's problems will be other person's solution. Right? So how do we then sort of balance it out? So Buddha was not only teaching how to be smart and savvy. So the Buddha always brought in not only wisdom, which makes us smart and savvy, but also the ethical dimension, that you have to always have the ethical, moral value embedded in your actions.
Naked Mindfulness with Rishav Kharel. Namaste and welcome back to Naked Mindfulness. It's a space where we not just talk about knowledge, but we explore wisdom, and we'll talk about the inner transformation, the experience, the real experience. So to explore this, we have a very special guest from all the way from Bhutan, Dr. Phuntsho. He is a well-renowned and very respected Bhutanese scholar, intellectual, and he's also known as known internationally for his work in Buddhism and the history of Bhutan. He's also the first person to receive a PhD from Oxford, and at the same time he became the first Bhutanese to receive Ramon Magsaysay Award. So let's welcome him. Thank you, Lopen, for being here in our podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me, firstly to be here in the country of Buddha's birth, and then specifically to be part of Nepal Buddhist TV. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's our pleasure to bring you here. And how was your stay here? Ani हजुरको यो event कस्तो भयो 3 दिनको?
I had 2 very successful events here. पहिले चाहिँ एउटा कन्फरेन्स थियो Bodhichitta को बारेमा. Bodhichitta means the thought of awakening, the thought of or mind of awakening and enlightenment. We had a big gathering of very learned monk scholars and nuns, some of the best teachers in the Tibetan and Nepalese and Bhutanese monasteries. They came together to discuss the topic of Bodhichitta. And that was a conference organized by Chadra Foundation. And we did that at Sheshen Monastery in Bauda. It went very well. Then I was invited by a colleague of mine from Namdruling Monastery, Khenpo Pema Tsering, to do 3-day talk series for Nepalese friends on Buddhism and life skills. And this is the first time actually I'm here talking to Nepalese friends outside the monasteries. I do a little bit of such work in Bhutan and also talk with people from the West. But I've always wanted to engage with the young citizens of the Himalayas, sharing the same kind of Buddhist background. So this has been a very rewarding experience. I hope people who came to the talk series also benefited or enjoyed it. But we finished that yesterday.
I was there in the talk series as well.
Thank you for coming.
Before starting, your journey is so interesting. I mean, it's so inspiring as well. From a monastic to Oxford. So before starting the podcast, I just want to know about your introduction, your background, and the journey of your life.
Thank you. I'm from central Bhutan and come from a very religious family. But I went to school. I was quite lucky that my parents sent me and my siblings to school, although in those days, not all parents would send their children to school because modern school education was quite new. And then just before finishing high school, some karmic force made me leave school. It's a long story, but to cut it short, it was a karmic force that made me leave school and become a monk without even informing my parents. I joined a Drukpa Kaji monastery in Bhutan. And then in search of better education, Buddhist education, I ran away from Bhutan without informing my parents to India and went all the way down to South India and initially studied at Sera Monastery, which is one of the biggest Gelugpa centers, and then joined the Nagarjuna Nyingma Institute, which is the scholastic college of Namdrolling Monastery. And I went through 9 years of training there. In between, I also taught and ran a nunnery. And then again, after finishing my monastic training, I ran away, so to say, to go and pursue a Western degree in a recognized academic institution. So that's how I ended up in Oxford, pursuing a postgraduate degree, which then led me to do a DPhil or PhD. And then I got a postdoc in Paris, and Cambridge offered me a position to research there. So I spent 9 years at Cambridge University. So that's kind of my educational journey and my work with Buddhist texts and Buddhist teachings.
Why did you run away? I mean, your parents was not convinced? Or?
No, I didn't quite run away, as in they didn't allow and I had to run away. It was just that I was quite far from them. And in those days, it was very difficult to communicate with people from, say, the capital town, Thimphu then, now it's a city, from there to Bumthang, which was 2 days by car. Now it's only 1 day, and there were no telephones. So basically, I left without telling them, and I left school and monastery, sometimes also against the advice or against the wishes of some of the authorities. So I put it as running away, but it's not really running away like escaping from something wrong or against the wishes of the parents or teachers.
It's so interesting and inspiring as well. At first, when I learned about you, I was very inspired from that journey. So let's start the podcast with the basic of Buddhism. Why? Because there are lots of audience, a lot of our listeners has messaged me and said, we want to know more about Buddhism. What exactly is Buddhism? How we can understand Buddhism? Why is Buddhism so important in today's generation? So to learn what exactly is Buddhism, I just want to start from what exactly is Buddhism, the fundamentals of Buddhism, from you.
Thank you. I can share my understanding of the Buddha's teachings from a mixed perspective. I've been through traditional monastic training, so there is one way of looking at the teachings of Buddha from that point of view. But I've also been through rigorous modern academic study of Buddhism, so there is a little bit of that perspective that I also take. So if I look at Buddhism or the Buddha's teachings from a mixture of these two perspectives, the easiest description of Buddhism is a science of the mind and an art of mind training. In the West, psychology, which deals with the mind and our consciousness, is a fairly new subject. It's a new field. It started mainly in the 20th century. Whereas in the Buddhist system, the study of the mind, the work on the mind, has been around for 2,500 years. So it's a very rigorous psychology, you could say. It first deals with understanding the ordinary state of the mind, what different levels of consciousness we have, what different mental factors or states of mind we have, what provokes them, and so forth. So very, very rigorous psychological study of the sentient mind. And then, more importantly, the Buddha's teachings deal with how to improve that mind, how to make our mind better. If it's a very distracted mind, how to focus it, how to gain concentration through different meditation techniques, through different rituals. If it is a very aggressive mind, how do you make it calm and composed? If it's a very egoistic, selfish mind, how do you make it more compassionate, more altruistic, more caring? If it's a very dull mind, how do you sharpen it? How do you make it more intelligent? So the Buddhist theories, practices, philosophies, rituals, a lot of things that Buddhists do and the Buddha taught should help us transform the inner state of the mind. And then Buddha's teachings talk also about what happens when it is fully transformed. What is the Buddha's spirit like? What will happen when I'm fully enlightened like the Buddha? So Buddhism, or the Buddha's teachings, is more or less a science or field that works with the inner state of the mind. And that's why here in the Himalayan countries, when people ask us what religious tradition or religious system we follow, most people would say we follow Nangpa. Nangpa literally means insider, the tradition of the insider, one who looks more inward in the inner state of the mind than outward towards the material world, towards the world without. So that would be my understanding of Buddhism in very basic terms.
It's like an inner journey.
It's a totally inner journey. Although that's not to say that external conditions don't matter. So while the primary objective is to train and transform the inner state of the mind, that requires other conditions like this body. So you need to have a healthy body. And to have a healthy, good body, you need to also have very good food, shelter. So you need socio-economic conditions, good political, conducive political situations to pursue that inner spiritual journey. But Buddhism, in essence, is really about transforming the inner state of the mind. It's an educational program to learn the truth, to know the way things are, and align one's thought, one's thinking to the way things are, to the truth, and that way become awakened or enlightened. So basically to liberate the mind from ignorance, from not knowing the way things are, and be fully aware of the truth. And the Buddha, the word Buddha basically means the awakened one, the one who knows, the enlightened one.
So when we say about Buddhism, we nowadays hear that Buddhism is very important for this generation. So why is Buddhism very important for this generation?
Well, not only just this generation, I would say this era, this century, anyway, because the world in general has done so well in terms of material development. You have, of course, the developed economies like Western Europe, North America, East Asia, which have already reached almost the optimal level of physical material development. GDP is very high. They have almost everything they need for basic, comfortable living. And even a lot of the developing countries, including places like Bhutan and Nepal, we have made tremendous progress in terms of human development, which includes also increase in living standards, educational achievement, health, and so forth. So in this century, we have been doing so well materially. But in the same process, as we were becoming successful economically and successful in material development, our internal state of the mind, the inner sort of mental stability has been declining. People are far more restless now. There are more mental health issues in this century than there was in the 20th century. So given these challenges, and given that we have the basic material conditions, thus it's important now, it's timely now to look inward. So when you think about development, we have to really think about a balanced development between external material conditions and the internal spiritual well-being. Right now, across the world, there's far less focus on the inner spiritual well-being. And that's why I think traditions like Buddhism, now it's not limited to Buddhist teachings. Other religious traditions also have wonderful answers, wonderful solutions to that. But Buddhism is very rich also in how to look after the inner state of the mind. So I think it's a very, very appropriate spiritual tradition for this century. The other point would be that in this century, there are far more people who are scientifically oriented, who have a more secular worldview, who are more rational. Buddhism, in many ways, is a very rational system. You don't follow a religious Buddhist tradition through blind faith. The Buddha was always seeking critical thinking, encouraging open inquiry. So there is a lot of room for rational thinking in the Buddhist teachings. And as a result, a lot of people find the Buddhist teachings compatible with modern way of thinking, modern scientific approach. So I think for these reasons, Buddhism is perhaps doing well, especially among the very well-educated communities.
So when we know about Buddhism, we also learn about the Four Noble Truths, about the suffering. So how can people can understand Four Noble Truths? What is it trying to say, and how can that be applied in this world? And what exactly is Four Noble Truths? Talk about suffering, and also I also want to know about the Noble Truth.
Yeah, it's very important. In fact, when Buddhism or Buddha's teachings were passed to the West, initially it went through the Theravada countries. And there the topic of Four Noble Truths feature as a very important topic. It's also a very important topic in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions and the Vajrayana traditions, but I think the Theravada traditions focus more on it. And I think it's so important because this is the topic, the subject of the Buddha's first sermon. I can go into a lot of details, but let me give a more brief, summarized response. After the Buddha became enlightened, he was reluctant to teach what he discovered. And then we have this story of how Lord Brahma and Indra would come and request him to teach. And then he goes on to find who will be a fitting vessel, a recipient of his teachings. And then he finds his previous colleagues, the 5 ascetics who actually left Kapilavastu with him when he left his kingdom in search of spiritual truth. So he approaches them and he teaches them this message. He basically declared that there are 4 truths. First truth is that life has suffering. Samsara is full of suffering. Second truth, these sufferings don't come out of nowhere or is not created by some creator, God, or some sort of singular agent, but they come from causes and conditions. Third truth, that there is a cessation of suffering. And fourth truth, there is a path leading to the cessation of suffering. And these 4 noble truths, or 4 truths of the nobles, because only the enlightened nobles understood it, were taught by the Buddha in his days, in his idiom, in the language and the idiom of the day. If the Buddha were with us today, I feel he would teach it in a slightly different form. What I often say is the Buddha would have probably said, life is full of problems. That is truth number 1. These problems just don't come out of nowhere. They are caused by many causes and conditions. That would be truth number 2. and that there is a solution to every problem. That would be truth number 3. And then that there are paths to follow, ways to follow to find that solution. That would be truth number 4. And then Buddha elaborates on the path. So I personally think if we translate the 4 Noble Truths into problems, cause of problems, solution, and path to the solution, the Buddha was basically teaching a problem-solving strategy, like a management guru in a business school. It's a very smart, pragmatic approach to life, especially in terms of solving problems. And he taught this 3 times, actually. He made 3 recitations. First time he said life is full of problems, and then second round he said problems must be identified, recognized. Only after identifying a problem you can fix it, right? So it's very important to identify the problem. One must eradicate the cause of the problems, and one must achieve or attain the solution to the problem, and then one must diligently follow the path leading to the solution. So he was a very pragmatic master in that respect. Now, one of the things, of course, we have to also bear in mind is, while the Buddha taught a very strategic approach to problem solving, a very smart way to analyze things and be very pragmatic and practical about overcoming issues in life. Now, some person's problems will be other person's solution, right? So how do we then sort of balance it out? So Buddha was not only teaching how to be smart and savvy. As we know right now, America's solution is Iran's problem. So how do you sort of decide what is the real problem, what is the real solution? So the Buddha always brought in not only wisdom, which makes us smart and savvy, but also the ethical dimension, that you have to always have the ethical, moral value embedded in your actions. So a problem is not a problem just of one individual or one nation, but a problem that's faced by a greater number of people, or a bigger number of sentient beings. The solution shouldn't be also a temporary solution for some people, but should be much more sustainable, long-term solution for everyone. So such problem-solving strategy that the Buddha taught was based on a very sound ethical theory, that firstly, if you're following the Buddha, there should not be any harm caused by your actions. Non-harming is a fundamental Buddhist precept. So you may try to solve a problem, but if that problem solution is only a selfish solution, causing a lot of harm to other people, say a businessman wanting to solve a problem of having more money, let's say he has a big loan and he has to solve that problem by hiking the price of the product. But if such a thing harms many people, then that's not an ethical, moral solution. Right? So the Buddha's way to distinguish an ethical, moral solution from non-virtuous solutions would be that firstly, it shouldn't harm anyone. It shouldn't harm oneself. It shouldn't harm others. Non-harming is a fundamental Buddhist precept. You take a refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha as Buddhist, non-harming becomes a fundamental precept. And then, especially in case of Mahayana Buddhism, not only should one avoid harming others, one should also be able to help others. So you have a culture of compassion come in. You have the culture of altruism come in. So one's wisdom or one's critical thinking, one's smartness must be guided by moral, ethical compass. One's head, however smart one would be, should be guided by one's heart. So that would be the Buddha's approach to life, especially through the Four Noble Truths.
So as you mentioned about the 3 Theravada, Mahayana and Vajrayana, the 3 paths. So what's the difference? How can we segment them?
Again, this is a slightly complex topic. Firstly, please don't mind, but to break it down to Theravada, Mahayana and Vajrayana is also a very simplistic, slightly inaccurate classification. So when the Buddha was around, he had many disciples, as we know. He traveled in northern India teaching for 45 years. So you can also sort of understand how he would have given different teachings to different people based on their needs and their situation. The Buddha often compared himself to a doctor. A doctor would diagnose the problem, eradicate the cause of the problem, or at least give advice to eradicate the cause of the problem, then give help the patient find the cure and show the path leading to the cure. Right? So you have diagnosis, eradication of the cause of the illness, then the cure which is sought, and the treatment which leads to the cure. Buddha did exactly the same thing through his teachings. Identify the problem, eradicate the cause of the problem, seek the solution, and get the treatment or the path to the solution. So when you look at this, the medical analogy that the Buddha used, he was basically treating a lot of different people. So just as a doctor wouldn't give one medicine to everyone, the Buddha, one can assume, gave a lot of different teachings. So often we say 84,000 different teachings. In 45 years, his ideas would have been different at different times. So during his time, there were lots of already followers who understood the Buddha differently. But at least the Buddha was still around, and he could explain to them how things were coherent, how things can fit into the bigger scheme of the Buddha's teachings. A year later, after he entered Mahaparinirvana, which is the Buddhist way of saying he passed away, then his senior disciples got together and compiled all his teachings. And then again, some years later, they had to do a revision of that. So you can imagine how the Buddhist teachings were passed down after the Buddha orally, not written down, because there was no widespread writing culture then. And as they got passed down, obviously we know things get interpreted differently, recorded differently. And then you have to imagine North India is quite a big place. So you imagine some disciples up in Gandhara, which would be in modern Afghanistan, some disciples in Assam, and how they would have, after many decades, start to have Buddhist teachings in their own language, wear clothes slightly different from each other. So by Ashoka's time, some 300 years after the Buddha, there were already so many different sects, at least 18 that were recorded in most common enumeration. So of these 18 lines of Buddha's teachings, transmission of his ordination, especially the monastic ordination, it's passed down from master to disciple. There were 18, and today we have only 3 left. One is the Theravada line, the other is the Mulla Sarvastivada line, which is common in Tibet, and then the third is Dharmaguptaka line, which is common in China, Japan, and Korea. So of the many sects around Ashoka's time, we have only 3 lineages continuing now. And these early schools are all later sometimes presented as Hinayana or low vehicle. Although I would say they call them early schools or mainstream Buddhist schools, because they were the foundation, the early mainstream upholders of the Buddhist teachings. Now, among all these schools, there were some monks who were very innovative, who started to reinterpret the Buddha's teachings differently, and who also could find old texts that presented a different view of the Buddha or different teachings of the Buddha. So around the time of Jesus Christ, so beginning of what we call the Common Era, 100 BC to about 200 AD, there was a new movement in India where there was a new interpretation. And the new interpretation involved things like non-harming, which I shared. Before that, non-harming was very important. Renunciation was very important. You would become a monk or a nun to seek nirvana. Personal liberation or personal nirvana was the main goal. But these monks who reinterpreted said, no, not only we should stop harming, we should go out and help. So compassion came to the fore. Altruism came to the fore. Bodhichitta, the thought of awakening, came to the fore. And through that, this belief that not only should one seek nirvana for oneself, actually one should seek Buddhahood for all the sentient beings. And that is what Bodhichitta is, wishing all sentient beings to reach the state of the Buddha, because the state of the Buddha is the ultimate state of happiness. And along with that, you also see the expansion of Buddhas. In early Buddhism, like 500 years, you find mostly monk Buddhas. But as this movement spread, you find also new universes to the east and west and south and north, and also different Buddhas, which are not always monks. So you see the expansion of the Buddhist pantheon, and you see a lot of bodhisattvas who aspire to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. And this new movement came to be known as Mahayana, the greater vehicle. So in contrast to the Mahayana thought, the earlier Buddhists were considered as lower vehicle or Hinayana. But these Mahayana monks and scholars were actually part of the early Buddhist schools. Then 500 years later or so, Buddhism had a lot of exchanges with other religious traditions in India. And you see a syncretic Buddhism coming up with mantras to chant, with deities to visualize. And you not only find human or godlike deities, you also start getting animal-headed deities like Bhairav. You get wrathful deities to show ruthless compassion. So you see the rise of Tantric Buddhism. And by 8th century, you have Tantric Buddhism in India very well established. So now when you look at the Buddhist world, Buddhism went to places like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, before the Mahayana tradition developed in India. So they have the early Buddhist tradition. Buddhism went to China through Central Asia from about 100 AD. So China, Japan, and Korea has the Mahayana tradition as well. Buddhism came to places like Tibet, Bhutan, and also most parts of Nepal, northern Nepal, after the 8th century through figures like Padmasambhava. So you have all three layers of Buddhist development that happened in India. So we cannot just say Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, which is a very simple way of classifying today. Actually, it is early Buddhist schools which also exist in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, the Sarvastivada, and in Chinese Buddhism as Dharmaguptaka line, mainly through ordination line. And then you have the Mahayana for both Chinese or East Asian Buddhist tradition and Himalayan Buddhist traditions. And Vajrayana, you have some early form of Tantric or Vajrayana Buddhism in China and Japan, but places like Nepal, Tibet, and Bhutan has much more advanced form of Tantric Buddhism.
As you said, I talked about Padmasambhava as well, and I want to connect this, connect with this with Bhutan's actually the history of Buddhism, because as we know that this as Padmasambhava took the manifestation of Dorje Drolo, and he flew in the tigress, which was Yesesogyal. And that was so interesting. And what happened after that? What was exactly Buddhism introduced in Bhutan, or what happened after Padmasambhava went to Bhutan, and how Guru Rinpoche is seen in Bhutan? So I want to know that as well.
Thank you. The Bhutanese are very proud of Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche as we call him, the precious teacher. I think he's more well known in Bhutan as Guru Rinpoche than in other parts of the Himalayas. Although, of course, many Nepalese would use the same term, Tibetans also do. But I think in Tibet you find also the term Lopen Rinpoche, the precious Acharya. And then often Guru Padmasambhava. But Guru Rinpoche is a term of endearment. Now, 8th century India, or ancient India, which also covers Bangladesh, Pakistan, and some part of Afghanistan, was at the height of its civilization. I think there were not many places in the world that were so culturally, spiritually rich, and also intellectually very advanced. In 8th century India had technology, had arithmetic, and it's definitely a lot of philosophy and political thinking. So, and then they had many universities. So Padmasambhava, we believe, was born in Swat Valley in modern-day Pakistan. So he was very close to all these vibrant intellectual and spiritual centers. Takshila University was nearby. Vikramashila, Nalanda were all thriving then. So he firstly grew up as a prince, then he left the kingdom just like the Buddha did, and went in search of Buddhist teachings. He got training in all these fantastic educational institutions under great masters. Then he had very, very long, rigorous training in the in different spiritual sites under great masters. So even when you look at the human history of Padmasambhava now, traditional historians would already talk about Padmasambhava as an incarnation of Amitabha Buddha or Avalokiteshvara Buddha. But even from a human perspective, he went through the best of education and best of spiritual training that existed in those days, you could say. So when he came to places like Bhutan, he was one of the most skilled, most sort of talented spiritual master, you could say. Bhutanese generally claim that he came to Bhutan before he went to Tibet, about 12 years before he went to Tibet. We have a rough rough year being given as 750. And he was invited from Nepal, actually. He was probably in Parping, here outside Kathmandu. And a small prince, there was a princely kingdom in my part of Bhutan, in central Bhutan, who got ill, and he was looking for a miracle man to heal him. And invitations were sent out to anyone who had the power. So that is how the story goes. And Padmasambhava got invited by this king to Bumthang in central Bhutan. And he enters into a cave for a short retreat and subjugates the spirit that harmed the king. He restores the health of the king, and the king is converted to Buddhism and so forth. So the story is he came to Bumthang and introduced Buddhism to people there. And then he spent a lot of time in the Bhutanese valleys as a wandering ascetic meditator. And the story you hear of him is of him flying on the tiger's nest, Sogel, to Paro Taksang, tiger's nest, which is today the most popular religious site and probably the most iconic Buddhist site in the entire Himalayas. So Padmasambhava's presence in place like Bhutan is ubiquitous. It's universal. In fact, as a cultural scholar and historian, I often make the claim that he is the patron saint of Bhutan, just as Buddha is to Nepal, or Avalokiteshvara is to Tibet. Now, you look at Tibet's history, the famous king Songtsen Gampo is considered incarnation of Avalokiteshvara. Even the story goes on to say how Tibetans started from a monkey who was an emanation of Avalokiteshvara. They believe the Dalai Lamas are all incarnations of Avalokiteshvara. So Tibet is seen as this realm to be taken care of by Avalokiteshvara. And then you have Manjushri often associated with China. So in that respect, I think Guru Rinpoche is the patron saint of Bhutan. Now in Bhutan, the first prayers that a little child will learn to chant would be Om Ahum Vajra Guru Pema Siddhi Hum. Almost all family shrines, one could say all family shrines in Bhutan would have a Guru Rinpoche statue or an image. The biggest statues you find in Bhutan would be also, well, there's a Buddha statue as well, but of Guru Rinpoche. So Guru Rinpoche has such a big influence. The largest state festivals would be on Guru Rinpoche's life. Even the fleeting dreams that hermits have would be of Guru Rinpoche. So in many ways, Guru Rinpoche pervades the entire Bhutanese spiritual and cultural world. And I think a great deal of what Bhutan has in terms of spiritual and cultural heritage also comes down from Guru Rinpoche. So he's definitely so important.
How did he was such a good influencer in Bhutan?
I'm a researcher, so from the research we do, we know he went to Tibet. But in early records, sometimes you find him being associated with the borderlands. And places like Nepal, Bhutan, Sikkim were on the borderlands of central Tibet. And you find mention of how he is associated with the Mon borderland people. It looks like Guru Rinpoche spent a lot of time in places like Bhutan and went to Tibet when sort of asked to come, or when they, in one early account, he was even asked to leave Tibet because he had this innovative knowledge of technology and irrigation, and so he made some of these proposals which the conservative Tibetan ministers couldn't quite understand and thought they're being threatened. I think they were worried about losing their power due to his so superior knowledge and superior spiritual power. So he was asked to leave Tibet, and it looks like he came southward to places like Bhutan and spent time meditating in our valleys. And today we have many places considered as hidden valleys of Guru Rinpoche, including my own village, still named as Hidden Valley of Ugyen Rinpoche. And there are many caves, many rocks, many hermitage sites. Almost all the sacred landscape in Bhutan has some connection to Guru Rinpoche.
They also say that there are lots of termas which are hidden there, and it will be revealed when time comes.
Indeed, yes. So there is a very, very rich hidden treasure culture. I think it initially started in central Tibet. And then as the treasure hunters, treasure discoverers ran out of treasures to reveal in central Tibet, they looked beyond Tibet. So we have places like Bhutan, Sikkim, and even places in Sichuan and Yunnan in China, which became very popular for treasure hunting. So Bhutan received lots of Tibetan treasure discoverers coming in search of treasures. And it happens even today. A lot of Tibetan lamas would come to Bhutan, not all looking for treasures, but some would claim that they have rediscovered treasures. Then Bhutanese also learned this culture. So we have our own treasure discoverers, and one of the most important, perhaps the most influential, the foremost local Bhutanese spiritual figure, Pema Lingpa from, again, my district, my area. He was a treasure discoverer, and he became very highly respected, not only within Bhutan, but also in Tibet.
So as we talked about the 8th century, it reminded me of, Shantideva. He was also in the 8th century, right?
Yes, so Shantideva, if you talk about Mahayana teachings, and especially Bodhichitta, the cultivation of Bodhichitta, the thought of awakening, he is one of the most influential, most inspiring authors to read. And he is supposed to have lived around the beginning of the 8th century. We don't have precise dates for him, but it's roughly in the beginning of the 8th century.
So how was Shantideva? We heard that Shantideva was a Siddha in 8th century who was very lazy and was very bullied by his friends. So I just want to know about Shantideva. How can we know him?
Well, the life story of Shantideva is not as clear and well recorded as we would have liked. So there are stories. The longest stories about Shantideva comes from a 13th century Indian Pandit called Vibhuti Chandra. And in fact, he traveled to Tibet with a Kashmiri Pandit called Shakeshri. And he spent a lot of time here in Kathmandu. So some of the Sanskrit manuscripts of Shantideva's works, not written by Shantideva, but books which contain Shantideva's teachings in Sanskrit, they were discovered here in Kathmandu Valley. And one book has a note saying it was gifted by Vibhuti Chandra to a Malay king or somebody, or maybe a Newari priest here in Kathmandu. I can't quite remember who he gave it to, but it was found here. Now, of course, it's in Cambridge University Library. Now, Vibhuti Chandra gave the most elaborate account of Shantideva's life, growing up as a prince, and then just before he was enthroned, just before the coronation took place, he sees his Devata Manjushri on the royal throne saying, "Son, this is my seat and I'm your teacher." And his disciple cannot occupy the same seat as the teacher. And Shantideva takes that as a message that he should quit the kingdom. So he renounces his royal life. pretty much like the story of the Buddha. A lot of the stories later get sort of, they emulate the Buddha. So I think it's a very realistic story, although it's also possible that they just adopted the same narrative. But nonetheless, so what we have is Shantideva living his kingdom and then following a teacher doing mainly meditation on Manjushri and having visions of Manjushri. Then he becomes a monk at Nalanda, where he was, according to the biography, in constant communication with Manjushri. So Manjushri was his main teacher, so to say. He was studying under Manjushri through visions. But in the eyes of other monks, he was just eating, sleeping, and going to relieve himself. And these were the three main activities he did. So he was nicknamed Pusuku, and everybody thought he is this useless brat in the monastery, which will bring shame to the prestigious Nalanda University. So they wanted to chase him out. And so they make it a requirement for him to recite, to chant, or to teach in public. And that's what monks were required to do. So initially, according to some accounts, he sort of humbly sort of rejected. He didn't accept. But they insisted because they really wanted to kick him out. And so he accepts. And he sets up a very high throne, according to the story, and he climbs the throne miraculously. The throne was too high for him to climb otherwise, because they basically wanted to mock him. But then he managed to climb on it. And then he says, do you want to hear something new or something that already exists? And again, thinking this no good fellow has nothing to give, so they said, teach us something new. And he then chants the Bodhicharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, which in our current version, the most common version, has 10 chapters, about 934-5 verses. And this text is one of the most influential texts after Shantideva's time in the Buddhist world. So Shantideva chants that extemporaneously, or maybe he had it in memory and then he chanted it out. And according to traditional belief, when he reached a point in the 9th chapter talking about wisdom on emptiness, where you totally, utterly empty your mind of all concepts and fixations. So basically it's saying that there's no existence, there's no non-existence, and there's nothing in between to hook on. Your mind gets totally liberated. Your mind gets totally pacified. At that point, the belief is he started to rise from the throne and go higher and higher up and then disappear in the sky, while his voice could be heard throughout until the chanting ended, until the book ended. So that's the story of how Shantideva taught the Bodhicharya Avatara. We have found an earlier biography, probably earlier than what Vibhuti Chandra has given, which basically says he delivered his Bodhicharya Avatara lecture in such a powerful manner that he got unprecedented fame and attention. So a lot of people came with offerings to him. A lot of people would show courtesy to him, and he thought, oh, this is not right for a spiritual practice. Now, when you are adored, that's a distraction for a spiritual man. You get into this false idea of self-importance and so forth. So he saw that as distraction. And in fact, his teachings talk about the obstacles, too much offering, too much respect, and too much status in society can do to your spiritual training. He deals with that in great detail in one of his books. So he basically thought this is not right, not good for his spiritual training, and so he runs away from Nalanda to avoid that. Anyway, whichever story you want to take, Shantideva basically composed the Bodhicharya Avatara, and then another book called the Compendium of Training, where he puts together very, very important passages from the Mahayana Sutras, talking about how bodhisattvas must behave, how bodhisattvas must conduct. So he put an anthology of these citations and called it the Compendium of Training. And based on these citations from the Buddha's words, or from the Mahayana Sutras, he then composed this verse text called the Bodhicharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattva. And ever since, this book has been so influential. Recently, I edited both and put these works together in one volume, because in most monastic centers and also academic institutions, people read The Way of the Bodhisattva because it's so important, so well known, so inspiring. But the other work is less known. Most people don't even have a copy. So I thought it would be good to have these two put together, because they sort of shine light on each other. They help understand each other much better, and also for us to understand Shantideva more holistically. Basically, talking about this text, I highly recommend the book. I encourage everyone to read the book, The Way of the Bodhisattva. It is already in many translations, definitely in Nepali, in Hindi. The original is in Sanskrit, so a lot of Nepalis can even follow the original version, which is supposed to be very, very poetic. Even the Tibetan translation is very poetic. There are many translations in English, translations in German, French, Spanish, and some 24 languages. So it's available, and it's one of the most influential books to read. That Tibetan lamas used to say, if you haven't changed after reading this book, then there's not much hope. So try it out.
The Way of Bodhisattva.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
By Shantideva.
We'll definitely, the listeners will learn that book.
Yeah. And in this process, I want to mention the Chadra Foundation has recently done a website which discusses Bodhichitta in great detail, in very simple form for beginners, and then it's some depth for intermediate students, and then in-depth writings and teachings for advanced learners. It's an enormous resource that we have built on Bodhichitta, and Shantideva's works form the core of the literature. So if you are interested, go to Bodhichitta, bodhichitta.tsadra.org, and you'll find a lot of information there on Shantideva.
That's amazing. And this will be kept, I think. And I also want to join the, like you recently, you said the emptiness he explained, Shantideva. So the emptiness that was explained by Shantideva and the Nagarjuna, is there difference or is this similar concept?
So Shantideva followed the same tradition as Nagarjuna. The philosophical tradition known as the middle way, Madhyamika. Nagarjuna was the foremost proponent of the theory of emptiness, at least after the Buddha. So a lot of the texts he wrote were commentaries or exegesis of the teachings you find on emptiness in the Mahayana sutras. And Buddhist followers would believe the sutras were all from the time of the Buddha, or at least taught by the Buddha in some form. Nagarjuna composed a lot of books which were condensed gist of the sutras, especially on the topic of emptiness. So we talked about bodhicitta. Now bodhicitta can come in two forms. There is the relative bodhicitta or conventional bodhicitta, which is this wish to take all sentient beings out of suffering to the ultimate state of happiness. But then there's also the ultimate bodhicitta, which has to do with understanding reality, understanding the truth. And that, in the context of Nagarjuna and Shantideva thought, has to do with understanding the emptiness of all things.
So I've seen your video that you talked about Nagarjuna explaining that everything is interconnected. So what does that actually means, that interconnected?
Well, a very simple explanation. If you look at this microphone, this microphone has come to be through so many causes and conditions. The metal that's being used here comes from the earth, is processed by the miners and the factories. Then there must have been a designer who did some design work, an artist who probably designed the shape, and the technician who had to work on the sound sort of system, how to sort of capture the sound. There's so many innumerable causes and conditions that brought together this mic. So it's not something that is on its own self-existent. There's no real mic apart from the parts. There's no mic that comes automatically without depending on the miners and the factory workers and the technicians and the scientists and so forth, right? So many factors have come together to bring about this mic that we have. I mean, the amount of research alone, research into sound to come to this level of having microphone to record sound. I mean, it's many centuries, many decades of research that scientists have done. So basically, Nagarjuna's point or the Buddha's point of dependent origination is nothing comes out of no cause or of an eternal cause or a single cause. It's all a result of a very complex nexus of so many different factors. So we should know that everything is interdependent, interconnected, that there's no one solid, single, self-existent, independent thing, that the mic is empty of a true self-existence. It is just something brought together through so many causes and conditions. So interdependence or dependent origination is a way of looking at the empirical side of the mic, saying this has come to be because of interdependence of so many factors. Emptiness is the way of looking at the ontological side of it, saying the mic doesn't have a true, real, self-existent sort of entity. So the mic is empty of real micness, you could say. And the same applies to you and me. Now, I'm a result of so many different causes and conditions. I'm an assembly of so many different factors. There's no real karma you can find me, even if you chop my body apart and slice my mind into pieces. There's no real me. I'm empty of that real self-existence. But then on an empirical level, I appear, I speak, you hear me, because a lot of these conditions have come together for that experience to happen.
This brings me to the question of the most debated question and most asked question of it's about Atma and Anathema. So how Atma and Anathema concept are different?
So some religious traditions, especially coming out of India, argue that my body, my mind are all temporary, are impermanent, but there is a real me inside called Atman that is permanent, that's static, that goes from one life to other, right? The Buddha rejected that. The Buddha said, no, there is no Atman. I am basically what my body, mind, and other factors constitute. It's like looking at a chariot. This is the best example that the ancient Buddhists gave. We can say car now, or the mic. There is no real car apart from the parts. There's no real chariot apart from the parts. There's no sort of soul apart from the human psychophysical components. There's my body, there's my voice, there's my consciousness, but apart from that, there's no soul or no Atman that really is inside me. That is the argument. The Buddhists carry out a very reductive analysis. They dissect everything to say that there's no real mic or person or mug or table, that everything is just an illusory nexus of so many causes and conditions and parts that make the empirical experience happen. So the main point here is we are attached to the mic because we believe there is a real mic. We are attached to ourselves because we believe there is a real person or self. And from the point of the Buddha, if you think there is a self or I, that leads to the notion that there is he, she, you. And that creates a dualistic thinking, liking oneself and what belongs to oneself, disliking others, and then attachment comes out of that for oneself, aversion towards others, and that leads to negative actions, something that benefits oneself and harms others, so forth. So the whole process of rebirth and cycle of life and samsara is explained through a process of how the initial notion of the self and ignorance, a mistaken notion that there is this self, leads to this chain sort of process of becoming of samsara. So for the Buddha, it was so important to know that there's no real I or self to begin with. Only then you can sort of eradicate the very cause, the very source of this chain, this cycle that we are in. So the theory of non-self, Anathema, and also the theory of emptiness is all about understanding that there's no true real thing to be attached to cling on to grasp it. That we must experience things like we experience a dream. That yes, there is this inevitable, undeniable empirical experience. We can drink, we can eat, we can hear each other. That is the conventional reality. But if you were to look for real truth in these appearances, there isn't any. So things appear, but at the same time, things are empty of true existence. Because they are empty of true existence, they can appear in this very interdependent manner. So that is Nagarjuna's message, and that's what Shantideva also passes down through his books, and is the main philosophy that you find in the Tibetan Buddhist world these days in terms of philosophy.
As you said, we should just see that as a dream, but when we are seeing the dream, who is seeing the dream at that moment?
So in the case of the dream, it is the consciousness. There's no person as such. So that's the difference. Now, if you, for instance, look at Western philosophy, some people like René Descartes, a French philosopher, he has this slogan, this teaching saying, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He thought the person is the mind because the mind thinks. The thinking aspect is the mind. But for the Buddhists, no. We say my mind, no, not I mind. So mind is also just what belongs to the person, which don't really exist. It's a label given, just as we give the label table or mic to many parts put together in a certain shape with a certain function. In the same way, you call me karma because I have this body, this voice, and this role I'm playing. Now, suppose I'm dead and due to some bizarre accident, my body has been all chopped up into pieces and piled in a corner. No one would say that's karma. So it's really the cause, the conditions, the parts being put together with a certain shape, certain function, certain role, to which we have given the name karma. But there's no real karma in the parts.
That's so interesting and so well explained.
But this is also very important because one of the biggest problems we have in life in general, and especially in our times, is this notion that there is a real person, the I. No? And this is an eternal problem, the ego. This is an eternal problem. I think it has become even worse now. There's much more sense of I and personal space, privacy, and individualism. I was explaining the other day during the talk series that we are going through this phase where individualism is sweeping across the globe. Our societies had much less individualistic tendency in the past. I grew up with the whole family sleeping in one room and sharing everything. Today, every young person wants their own room. And then you have to get the permission to enter that room. There's that private space. You have to be careful what jokes you crack. Because some people get offended because their image of themselves, their self-importance is so so important. Yes, yeah. And then the urban sort of living. I suppose there were also some degree of individualism in urban places like Kathmandu, because Kathmandu is a very old city compared to places in Bhutan. Bhutan was an entirely rural community 60 years ago. So our towns and cities are only 56 years old. But when you move from a rural space, rural community to an urban place where you have space constraints, where life is like more expensive, then automatically you have a nuclear family. And that makes you have more individualistic lifestyle. Now, you cannot have your uncles and aunts live with you all the time. You can't have your grandparents come because of space constraints, because of economic reasons. So you end up becoming more and more individualistic, more smaller in terms of family units. And a lot of people, of course, don't get even married early now. So there's a lot of sort of, you could say, lot of people taking up this private, individual sort of life where you don't sort of share much, and that really affects communal well-being. So I think in our times we really need to think hard about the idea of the self. Think more about sharing, about the community. Bring back some of the old traditions on how you work for the community. Community solidarity in many parts of the world has gone down after urbanization, after modernization.
Yeah. And we should also, as you said, we should look into the self. And I also want to join, as you mentioned about your foundation of Seda Foundation. What work is exactly Seda Foundation is doing? And I heard that you promote Bodhisattva entrepreneur as well. So,
So there is a little confusion here. I do work for the Chadra Foundation, which is based in the US, but I would work remotely to make my own living. And that foundation aims to transmit the culture of wisdom and compassion from the Buddhist world to the West through a combined practice of study and contemplation. So they give scholarships for Western young people to come to study long-term in places in Nepal, in India. Then they also fund people to go into long 3-year retreats. They also fund many translators to translate Tibetan Buddhist books. There are some 16 translators currently being paid by Chadra to translate these books. Chadra has funded many more. I think there are over 40 translators. Then Chadra is also funding to publish Tibetan Buddhist books. We have some 13 different monasteries in India and Nepal partnering with Chadra to publish books and make them available online as ebooks. Then Chadra organizes events, including the events that I run, bringing academics to discuss Buddhist topics, bringing monastics and practitioners to discuss Buddhist topics. And then we build these resources. So there's a website on Buddha Nature. If you go to buddhanature.org, you will go to that website, and we try to promote the idea that we are all Buddhas by nature. Buddha Nature is about wisdom and compassion as our true nature, because today in the world we have serious problems. Some people of sort of self-hatred, of depression, people not really finding any confidence in themselves, having very low self-image, self-esteem. So we want to really bring this idea from Buddhism that we are all Buddhas by nature. We are all positive. We are all loving and caring and compassionate by nature. We need to bring that nature out. So we have this resource on Buddha Nature, and then we have the resource on Bodhichitta, which I mentioned earlier, which promotes this culture of compassion and altruism. So that's what I do for Chadra Foundation. But in Bhutan, I also voluntarily work. Now I'm a trustee on the board of the Loden Foundation. And that was what I started in 1999 as a student at Oxford. And me and my friends, we managed to sort of grow the organization into a leading educational charity in Bhutan now. We work in education, and we promote social entrepreneurship, and we also do major cultural documentation. So these are 3 main programs, and my role is really to look at our cultural heritage, our spiritual heritage, because we are going through a lot of changes. Bhutan is going through a tremendous change right now, and a lot of our traditional lifestyle, traditional knowledge is being lost because most people pass down their traditions and knowledge and skills and values orally. Today, a lot of young people are literate, but the oral knowledge is being lost because we have not managed to write them down and record them properly. So one of the main projects we have is to record the oral traditions, but we also go out and digitize the ancient archives that exist in the remote temples and family homes in Bhutan, so that these books are safely preserved, and then digital copies are produced for wider readership who needs them. So when you explore the oral and written and also artistic heritage of Bhutan's past, you find these timeless values which are so important even to our own life today. So we try to bring those values. That is mainly my role, to bring them and inject them into our educational pursuits, inject them in practice of business and entrepreneurship. So these 3 programs are what we run through the Loden Foundation. And I've also been busy going back to my village to help the village community preserve their cultural heritage and also leverage it for economic development. Then because of change in society and because of rise of mental health problems, I've also set up a small center in Thimphu for people to come and study and contemplate, study and meditate, to help whoever is interested. And I think through these different ways, I hope there will be some benefit at least, especially for the young people who today face a lot of confusion and a lot of stress.
So you've been doing a wonderful job. And
well, I don't know if it's wonderful, but it's a modest, sincere sort of effort to help people like myself. I've been very lucky to be, I say, at the right time, the right place to receive the educational opportunities I received. And I started the Loden Foundation with the aim to help others who may not necessarily get the same opportunity.
So I think we are at the last of this podcast, and it was wonderful to have a conversation with you, and we have learned a lot of things. We got a lot of wisdom from you. And before going, you want to, if anything you want to say to the youth right now?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. As I said at the beginning, this is my first time engaging with the regular Nepalese friends here. For many years, I thought that we should have more interaction. We have been doing some things in Bhutan, and overall Bhutan has been successful on many fronts. For instance, environment conservation. Bhutan is a champion of environment conservation. It's well known as the first carbon negative country. And we have done well because we have a very rich spiritual past, a spiritual heritage which helps us conserve nature, respect nature. And then that has been now complemented by very positive, progressive, legislative policies and programs. So we have some things that we do better. But then Nepal, we know also being almost like a twin sort of country in the Himalayas, you have again your strengths, and it would be good to really share each other's experiences. After running these programs in Bhutan, I've always wished to bring our experiences and share it with brothers and sisters beyond Bhutan, especially when we come a similar cultural background. I think going to other countries that don't share the same sort of geographic and cultural background will be difficult if it can't be even sort of tried out properly in a context that is similar to ours. So I'm really pleased that I got this opportunity this time. What I look forward to is feedback from those who attended the talk series and also feedback from people who are listening to this podcast, and see where can we do better, where can we share knowledge, where can we share experiences so that we progress together. And if firstly we make the country better and then the region better, and eventually we can also spread the word to the rest of the world. And I think both Bhutan and Nepal has a lot to offer on that front. I see a lot of similarities. Our regard for environment is based on our cultural belief systems and holy mountains, spiritual sanctuaries with devatas and with spirits. We have, you can see in Kathmandu Valley how many shrines there are, how many deities there are. And these are all manifestations of our regard for the environment, how we believe beyond the human being, beyond the you say the anthropocentric worldview, where human beings are at the center. We here have deities and non-human life forms are important and at least on equal footing. Then the same with regard to Buddhist heritage. Places like Bodha and Swayambhu are fantastic places to find some spiritual answers, spiritual consolation.
Realizations.
Yeah, realization indeed. So I look forward to more exchanges to sort of share knowledge and experiences and grow together.
Yeah, we agree on that as well. So once again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with here, Lopen. So this is Naked Mindfulness. Do like, share, and subscribe to get more insightful conversation like this. Thank you.